Okay, so let's get started. It's my great pleasure to introduce Amal Ahmed. Amal is a professor at Northeastern University in Boston. She has done a lot of very cool work on programming language semantics and type systems, in particular in the context of correct and secure compilation. I met Amal when I was visiting some other professor at Northeastern, and since then I've been a huge fan of Amal's talks and lectures. So today she will be sharing with us some tips for doing PhD, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. So, welcome, Amal.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. I don't know how many people are online. Molly, if you want to tell me, that would be great, just to get a sense of how many people are talking to.
Yeah, we have about 3 or 4 online students at the moment.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, hi, everyone. I'm going to talk today about, just basically what is this PhD path all about? How to kind of get the most out of it. I've thought for many, many years now that a lot of students, especially undergrads, when they're looking for PhD programs, they don't quite know what are the right questions to ask. Early PhD students often don't know exactly what it is that they should be expecting from their advisor, how much attention, how little attention, how much should they be doing on their own, and all of that. And I think that it helps to sort of walk through what an ideal PhD is, how to behave, how to, do certain things, how much you should be taking on yourself, when it is, how much support you should be asking for. And again, I think one major error is that some advisors are kind of busy and students just don't feel like they ought to be asking for more help. So that's kind of the overall theme of, the various things that I want to talk about. So it's called managing your research, managing your advisor, and your PhD. So I'm going to start. Molly said that there are a bunch of people who, are not yet PhD students. So I want to start by talking about kind of pre-PhD years, and then I want to walk through, what do the rest of the years look like, just to give you a sense of, what's coming down the road. I think even if you're here now, if you have a sense of what we who've been doing this for a very long time expect when you're around year 5, I think you'll just be so much more prepared and able to get so much more out of the entire PhD experience, right? I feel like I learned a lot of things late, or maybe I learned them after. And so, over the years, I've been thinking, how do you tell people early so that, they go into it with this, view of, all right, here's what I need to do. Okay, anyway. Let's dive into it. Here's my disclaimer. I've been based in the US my entire career. I did my PhD in the US, and I've been teaching in the US, so there's a geographical bias to this talk. In the US, PhD programs are, PhDs are 5 years, 5 to 6 years generally. You started without first having a master's. I know that, Europe, UK, New Zealand, Australia, right? These PhD programs here are shorter, and you generally go into it with an MS, so just take that with a grain of salt. If I'm saying 5 years, maybe you compress that for other things. Do you need to stay here?
Yeah, that's the receiver.
Yeah, where do I stick that? Into the PC.
Oh, sorry. There.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't obvious where it goes. All right, perfect. Let's see if it works. No, it doesn't work.
It should work.
All right, so let's get started. Pre-PhD. So if you are currently thinking about applying for PhD programs or applying this year, what should you be thinking about? Well, first of all, actually, before I even talk about how to decide where to apply, I'm just going to say that, there's this question of why do we ever apply to PhD programs? Why do we get a PhD, right? And really the goal of a PhD is that at the end of, the whatever, 5, 6 years in the US or less elsewhere, you are getting this degree so that you learn how to do research, you produce something that was not known before, and really, afterwards you're ready to, for teaching positions, for research positions, academic, research track positions. If your goal is to become a developer afterwards, then I think you need to think a little bit more about what kind of, post-PhD career you're really interested in, and think about why am I doing this? right? I just want to say that. I think sometimes people don't fully reflect on that. So it's worth saying before we start. Okay, so where to apply? How many of you are undergrads? Okay, all right, so this is relevant for you. So how do you decide where to apply? Well, basically, what you're looking for is, this is a programming languages conference, so all my comments are going to be PL. So the question is which PL faculty and which PL departments are the right fit for you? That's really what you're trying to find out. So the best way to figure that out is to, take your undergrad advisor or a PL faculty member at your institution and have a conversation with them, right? And ask them, here are my interests, here's what I'm thinking. They know everyone in the community, you don't, right? They can tell you which departments are best, which faculty are best, right? And kind of point you in the right direction. So I don't think there's any substitute for that kind of conversation. So that's definitely something that you should do. And all of this needs to be sort of connected with, you understanding what your interests are, right? Reflecting on what it is that you're interested in working on, what kinds of problems are of interest to you. And you should also, in order to figure that out, you need to attend talks, for instance, here at Splash, right? Like a diverse set of talks perhaps, and read different papers, just read the introductions to papers. That tells you a lot already. It starts to help you kind of zero in on what appeals to you. And then after, you kind of found maybe a handful of papers that seem really interesting and intriguing to you, don't hesitate to email the faculty that you might want to go get a PhD with. Send them an email. Say, these are the things that I'm interested in. I just wanted to say hi. I'll be applying later on this year, or I just submitted my application, right? They might not reply. Faculty are busy, but you managed to put yourself on their radar. And that's not a bad thing. Really. I mean, I have had so many instances where I've had an email like that and I've ended up admitting a student. It just kind of tells me that, oh yeah, I have to remember to go look at the application pool and find this one. So then, let's say you apply, you get into a bunch of places. How do you really decide where to go, right? So I don't know exactly how it works here, but in the US, there's visit day. You basically go and visit, and you can ask a lot of questions when you go visit the department and talk to grad students and faculty there. But in terms of what factors to consider, a PhD is, some people might say, oh, I'd rather live in this city or that city, and of course you might have certain geographical constraints or personal constraints and so on, right? But modulo that, which of course is very different for all of us, right? What the most important thing that should affect your decision is the advisor and a fit with the advisor. All right, so you need to find an advisor who's a good fit, both in terms of research and in terms of personality. Like, if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to be micromanaged and you end up working with a micromanager, that's not going to be a great, few years. So, of course, how do you find out whether this person is a micromanager, right? You talk to their current PhD students, right? That's how you find out. And so you have to ask a really interesting set of questions that reveal a lot about this person, their work, their managing style, their advising style, and so on. And the other thing that I've found is often when students come to visit, I think that in all the years of watching people, I felt that the people who aren't really making perhaps the best decisions, and later they're like not sure there was the best decision, are people who hadn't sort of taken the time to reflect on themselves, on what they like, on what their perhaps working habits or research interests or other things are. So really, in order to make the decision, you have to understand yourself and your preferences as well, right? Only then can you sort of hone in on what is a good fit for you. The word fit is really kind of key. Okay, and what are your goals and ambitions, right? Like, are you like incredibly interested in academic positions afterwards? Do you want to be a professor? Well, maybe there are certain, things that you need to keep in mind then as you look for an advisor. Like, does this person have students who have become professors or something, right? Is there something special that they do in order to train you for that versus a research lab or something like that? Those are potential questions to ask. I might be jumping ahead. I think I'll have that on the slide later. The second most important thing in terms of where you go is figuring out the lab culture, right? The places where you will learn the most are the places, like, you learn an awful lot from your PhD advisor and perhaps other, let's say, faculty in that research area in PL. But you learn probably half of what you learn comes from your peers, right? So being in a lab, in an environment where there are other PhD students who are interested in helping, interested in talking, interested in discussing research, and so on, that's what's really gonna, do wonders for your PhD experience. You're going to learn a lot from them. There's nothing to avoid that. You have to keep that in mind. And one thing that I like to sort of point out is sometimes it should be a warning sign if you get the sense that this is a lab where people mostly work from home or students don't talk to each other very much, because that can be really isolating. If no one is there, then you won't really feel integrated. You won't really feel supported. You won't have people to talk to. Right? But of course, I also say that this is something that applies to pre-pandemic times. I used to think of it in those terms very much before. Our working patterns have changed nowadays, maybe, but still, people have to have a lab culture where even if everyone's coming in 3 days a week or 2 days a week, they have to come in those days of the week and be interested in connecting. And you'll be able to tell, right? You just have to ask the right questions. Okay. Twice somehow. Okay, I think that's the PDF version. All right, now many people get hung up on many other things, such as financial incentives. What is the reputation of the institution? So financial incentives, like oh, what startup package are you giving me? Like, are you giving me something so that I can buy a laptop? What is my stipend? And of course, these things matter. If you're going to be living in an expensive city, you have to be able to pay your rent, right? So I'm not saying that they don't matter, but as long as your basic needs are met, at the end, trying to compare offers based on which one is paying you a higher PhD stipend, that's not what this is about, right? This is really about the first two things. That's what matters. People don't do a PhD because you're going to get a few thousand more a year. You're not going to make a lot no matter where you are. Reputation of the institution. I have seen over the years so many people just pick a PhD program because it's highly ranked, right? They don't think about what it is that they want to do research on, and if that highly ranked institution actually has an advisor that would be a good fit for them. And then they go there and they're kind of lost, and they kind of, it doesn't work out. So think about who you are, what you want, and whether there is an advisor who is a good fit for you, right? An institution's ranking alone is not going to do any good for you. Location. So again, if you have a partner or family or some other reason why you need to be in a certain city or area, that of course you have to take into account, right? Your happiness matters. Those things can matter an awful lot. But modulo that, maybe it doesn't, right? These things are typically less important. Okay, and please feel free to interrupt. I would love to just make this a conversation. Right. All right. So then advisor fit, attending visit days and asking a lot of questions. That's kind of what I've been talking about. So you have to talk to their current and former students. These people are the sources of information, right? An advisor can kind of say a lot of things to you. Yeah, I like to do this. This is research interest and whatever. But who they really are on a day-to-day basis, that you kind of learn from the people who already are working with them in that role on a day-to-day basis. You should be asking, what can you expect to work on, right? Some advisors want to give every single student freedom to pick a topic. Some advisors will say, no, I have this gigantic research project going on, and I need you to work on that, right? That's how my group is built together, right? So you need to ask, what's going on in your group right now? Are you in the middle of a large project, and therefore, you need students to be part of a large project team? Or do you prefer, sort of like a bunch of individual projects? And this might be a timing thing. Different advisors, different professors kind of do different things at different points in their career. That's certainly something that happens. But also, but you need to ask the question, and then you need to figure out what it is that you prefer. There are pros and cons to this. I actually want to dwell on this a little bit. If being part of a large project team can be very nice because you feel supported, you feel connected. There are other people working on the same thing, and that's kind of nice. But the downside of that is that then you are one of many people. And I have seen many a PhD done as part of a very large project where only a couple of people become superstars, right? And the others don't. We'll just bluntly say that. That's a fact, right? So it's something to keep in mind. Individual projects can be a little bit lonely because it's an individual project, right? They're smaller. At that point, then you need to work differently. You need to make sure that the lab has this culture where even though different people are working on different projects, they will all be loosely connected because it's the same advisor, right? So it's one person's research interest. They all do have a connection. But you need to make sure that you're able to talk to people and you feel connected. But yes, individual projects have the plus that if you work on something really cool, you get all the fame and the glory, right, for having done that work. And these are things, that I'm kind of thinking about, like when you finish, what will happen, right? And how certain pieces of research are perceived. How big a group do they have? Do they have such a large group that they don't have time? Do they have a very small group, so much so that you feel like you wouldn't have enough other people to really have conversations with, right? And again, even what I just said, those two differences, it all depends on where an advisor is in their career. Generally, more junior advisors have a lot of time, and even if they have a small group, they themselves are spending so much time talking to everyone in the group that it doesn't feel like it's small, right? Whereas larger groups, the advisors generally might, or more senior advisors might have a little less time. And but they've invested years of their prior career building up a culture in their group, right? So then you start to learn more from the senior students who are already there because they've invested into that. And both styles work. It just, people need to know how to make it work, kind of. Sometimes, larger is not necessarily bad, and senior advisors have a lot of, skills in terms of how to manage a large group. But you need to ask if it's working well. How do they train students for academia versus training them for research labs? Believe me, there's a difference, right? Ask someone that question, and see what their answer is. See if you find it compelling. Yes, this is another thing. How well are current students doing in terms of publication record and so on? How well did former students do in terms of, getting sort of their career goals, whatever the jobs they wanted, that kind of thing. You can look at, the papers, sort of research reputation, what jobs did they get post PhD? And again, it's not always, sometimes, it's not entirely representative, so you need to ask questions in a sort of deeper way. You can't just look at, oh, former student went there, so they must be great, or, did not, then therefore they must suck. No, it's not that simple, right? You have to ask more questions. Any thoughts, questions? Okay. All right. So let's take a little pause. Let's move on to when you actually are a PhD student. Year one, what to expect. So now, how many people are sort of starting their PhDs or are in the early years? Okay. And the rest of you, how many people are more senior? Okay, so we really do have a mix. All right. Okay, so year one. What to expect in year one? Well, in the US at least, you are still taking, a bunch of classes and so on because this is a 5-year PhD program. So you have to focus on research, on classes, and, you may or may not have to TA. And really the main thing to say here is that once you are a PhD student, the research is what matters most, and you should make sure that you make time to focus on it, right? All these other things like, oh, I have to get through, my classes with a certain grade and whatever, and meet all the core requirements or whatever requirements you might have, or if there's a qualifying exam, like what do I need to do? You need to get through them. But none of them matter if you can't, if you aren't also doing these. So, it's really important to have a different mindset once you're a PhD student, and always remember that the research doesn't have deadlines usually in the same way that all the other things do, but you need to make time to focus on it. The other thing that, at the beginning, in the first year is when I think about, your research, I usually think of it as a starter project. So again, in the US, the PhD is 5 years, so we do have the luxury to kind of, have time for a first paper, a starter project, and then kind of think about what your dissertation would be. So maybe what I'm talking about in terms of a starter project is maybe what one does as master's research in other places. So look at that. So what is a starter project? Well, it's really, I use that term to describe something that that helps you learn a lot of technical skills, right? So if you do theoretical work, it should It should be the time where you learn how to do proofs of a certain sort. If you do implementation or measurement work, as part of that project, you will pick up the skills to do all of that, right? So you're picking up all of the basic technical skills that are required for the kind of work you expect to be doing and that your advisor generally does. You become familiar with literature in a certain area, and basically this leads to a first research paper, right? It's all framed around a first research paper as a goal. It does not have to be the thing that will be your dissertation, and you should not worry that, oh, this isn't exactly what, I'm not sure that I really want to be working on this. You should think of it as, this is going to lead to a paper, right? That's how we're sketching it out. And this is what I'm getting out of it. And basically, at the end of the starter project, you have learned so much that you're able to reflect on what it is that you like and what you don't like, right? That's the important part. The other thing that's new at the beginning is, starting with these things like advisor relationship, meetings, communication, right? So I would say that every single PhD student should definitely have a weekly meeting on the books with your advisor, and I would say it should be a weekly one-on-one meeting. Often we fall into this position where, there is a weekly meeting, but it's with 3 PhD students and the advisor. What happens, that's fine, right? It's a project, it's a joint thing, there are multiple people on it, but make sure that you're finding time to meet one-on-one with your advisor, otherwise you're never really going to develop a good relationship with them, right? Meeting with your advisor with 2 other people there or 1 other person there is not the same as really getting, forming that relationship one-on-one. So you do need one-on-one meetings as well. But in addition to the weekly meeting, right, it shouldn't be that, oh, I saw my advisor on Thursday, now I'll see them next Thursday, bye, right? You really, whenever you get stuck, you're working on something, or let's say you discuss something on a Thursday, and now by Monday or so, you're like, oh, but maybe we shouldn't do what we said in the last meeting, maybe we should do this. Pop in, right? Pop into your advisor's office, or if they're not available or something, message them, right? Just don't wait a week, is what I'm trying to say, all right? It's a very good thing to just be able to get questions answered or get a little bit of feedback to something that changes over the course of that week. That's how you make progress faster, okay? And that's how you also kind of stay in your advisor's attention and head, right? And they can help you make progress faster. You're helping them do research faster too, okay? So it's really important. The last one I can't stress enough. I think this is a skill, I'm not sure that most students have it when they start a PhD program, right? What does it mean? Like when I go into a research meeting, do I just sit there, we talk about stuff? Everything that you talk about with your advisor for an hour will be lost if you don't write it down, right? So you have to take good notes of research meetings. All of us advisors generally become these type of people where we're assuming that it's the student's project and that the student will be keeping notes, right? And then generally most advisors go from one research meeting to the next one. We're not keeping the notes, okay? And what happens if the student does not keep a good set of notes of what we discussed and where we want to go and what the possibilities are that we don't want to touch yet, but maybe we might come back to one day, is that you end up having the same conversations over and over again. It's a waste of time, all right? It really does happen. We are human, we are fallible, we do not have the kind of memories that we can retain everything that was discussed in a research meeting. That's why you need to take really good notes of things that were discussed or ideas that came up, even if you're not following them during the week that, or month that to follow. Follow up on to-do items and questions, right? Anything that was discussed, you need to do over the next week or 2, you should do. And basically the main thing I want to say here is that this is your project, so you need to manage it, right? All of this stuff, like you're keeping track. You're keeping track of what we said, where we want to go, what we want to look at next, what are the possibilities, right? You will have to drive it because, your advisor isn't responsible for necessarily keeping track of things that aren't your project. They might remember, but it won't be exactly the same way as you being thorough about it. Okay. The other thing that you have to get used to is now, you're suddenly a PhD student. It's year 1. It's this environment. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? There are a lot of talks happening, for instance, seminars, hiring talks, etc. Make sure you attend talks. Don't go to every single talk in every single area of computer science. You'll never have time to do your own research, right? But you do need to go to some. Like going to everything or going to 0, both are terrible options. You need balance. You need to find something in the middle, right? But you do need to go to talks because, especially hiring talks, this kind of thing, it develops breadth. You start to see, yeah.
What's the hiring talk, sorry?
Oh, hiring talk. Okay, so every single computer science department, sometime during the year, they will be hiring some faculty member. So when they do interview talks, the faculty candidate will come on campus and give a 1 hour long talk as part of the interview. These are really interesting because they're supposed to be talks that target a broad audience. Because when I interview for a faculty position, even if I'm in programming languages, I will have to give a talk that can be understood by all of computer science. Any computer scientist who's on the faculty of that department. So they are necessarily broad, which means that you will be able to, or you ought to be able to understand them if the candidate did a good job. And that's how we broaden our understanding of other areas of computer science. And one day when you go apply for a faculty position, you need to be able to know something about all the other bits, enough so that you look like a good candidate, right? Yeah. So, and you also get to see how, people present work to people outside of their area, which is a very, very important skill. And of course, go to, the PL seminar if you have a weekly PL seminar and things like that. But it's these broader talks that people often ignore, and you should remember to go to. Okay, what else? I wanted to mention imposter syndrome, right? So in year one, pretty much everyone has this feeling that, am I really cut out for this, right? Like, do I know what I'm doing? And in year one, frankly, none of us know what we're doing. None of us, right? It can be that sentence, I know less than everyone else, is 100% accurate. If you're a first year PhD student, everyone else is second, third, fourth, and fifth year, of course you know less than everyone else, right? So it's time to just kind of take a step back, and if you're feeling that way, just say, that's fine. They were here a year or two ago, right? And my advisor was here 20 years ago or something like that, right? Every single one of us has been there and have been in exactly that position, right? So, yeah, just really important to keep that in mind. I mean, sometimes I've had these conversations with like third-year PhD students who are like, fifth-year PhD student just kind of has to answer everything, and this is joint project, and I don't know what to do. I feel like I wish I could contribute. And you're like, I know, but that's normal, right? It's normal. I think there's a lot of power in that sentence and in remembering that this is exactly how it's supposed to work, okay? In a couple of years, you'll be the fifth-year PhD student intimidating someone else, right? That's how it goes. The other thing is that sometimes people get very afraid to sort of get up and give a talk. Get up and give a talk about what they're working on. You're a first year, you're like, what do I know yet, right? But you should start doing them. First year, second year, It's very important that you feel like your department is a safe space where you can make mistakes and have people in your lab, in your department, give you feedback. And that's how you learn and that's how you improve. If you don't give talks in this bubble, this safe space, which is your department, then what's going to happen, right? If you're too afraid to do it. And sometimes I've seen people who are too afraid to do it. They're worried about the criticism. They're worried about the negative feedback. It can be constructive feedback, but they still feel like, oh, okay, I don't want to do this, right? But it's important to do that because what's the alternative? Otherwise, one day you're going to have to go give these talks outside, right? And that's far worse. You don't want that to be your experience where you sort of get feedback that helps you improve. You want to do it before. And remember that, these departments, these are safe spaces, you're all helping each other out. Senior students are helping out junior students, and you will help out someone else when they're, when you're more senior. So it's really important to discuss ideas, even not such fully formed ideas, right? You don't have to wait to give a talk until your paper is ready, right, for submission or something like that. Do it earlier, right? Get into this. And again, maybe this is connected to that idea of lab culture when you're picking a PhD program and you're asking questions about what is the culture of the lab like. That's what you want to know. You want to know that people feel like this is, something, this feels like a department or a group or an environment where you can, stand up, share your ideas, people give you good feedback, help you improve. They tell you what you did well, they tell you what you did not do well, and you use that to get better, right? Okay, giving talk about work in progress, important for you to grow. I like to show this slide. I've always been struck by how, these PhDs work. And it's important to just sort of reflect on that for a second. We take someone who is a college undergrad, and then they are our colleagues. There's a tremendous amount of growth that's happening across those 5 years, or 3 or 4 years if you're in other PhD programs. It's just sort of stunning, right? You start as a college undergrad, you end up at the level of your advisor, essentially. I mean, they may be more senior, but you end up at their colleague. So, it's like this complete transformation that's happening across those 5 years. So you have to remember that, that's what this process is. And sometimes if it feels hard, that's why. Okay. So, year 1, common pitfalls. Oops. Focusing on classes and ignoring research, don't do that. There's this line, don't let the urgent trump the important. I don't know, I think I read it when I was like a first-year faculty member or something. And it's really, really important. There's always urgent stuff to do, right? But the important thing usually is research. It never is the urgent thing. Classes are urgent, TA is urgent, etc. Right? But do the important. Make sure you make time to do it. Oh, this is a really bad habit. Working for a day before your weekly meeting with your advisor. So many people do this, and sometimes you will do it. If you do it occasionally, it's fine. But if you do it all year, you're not making much progress, right? Okay, so that's a really important one to reflect on. If you find yourself doing that, last minute, last 24 hours, you're scrambling. Yeah, change your work habits. You need to be consistent. You need to develop consistent work habits, and make time to do focused work. Doing minimal effort, it's sort of not enough for a PhD. It can't possibly be enough for a PhD. Even if it's something that kind of worked when you were a student who was just doing coursework, right? It worked in college, but it doesn't work after that. Okay. Another common pitfall, and this is not just year 1, this is throughout, avoiding your advisor. So, many advisors are busy. It's very easy to just sort of avoid them and not be doing a lot of work, but just be avoiding them. And if they're busy, they might not have the time or the mental presence, to realize that you're avoiding them or that they haven't seen you in a few days or something like that. So they might not push you, but you're the one who loses, right? You're losing this valuable research time, and you're the one who's going to make slower progress. So, it's important to remember that. Not investing time in making lab friends. Again, your lab, your group, this is your support network. This is the network from which you're going to learn a lot. And explaining technical ideas to others helps you improve. It helps you feel more connected. So that really is something that's worth investing time in. If you just sort of stay away and say, oh, I'm busy, I'm doing my work, or I'm doing X, Y, Z, but you're not really building those relationships or talking to people, you won't be happy. You won't learn as much. Okay, let's talk about role of the advisor, right? What is it that you should expect from an advisor? And here, I think really students are sort of all over the map. Some of them expect way too much, and some of them expect way too little. Yes?
You mentioned common pitfalls earlier. So I would like, and before that you were mentioning about group versus individual projects.
Yeah.
And in group projects, you mentioned that 2 to 3 people get most of the credit for the work, right?
It's very large projects. Yeah.
So should fame and this kind of stuff should be a metric for doing a PhD?
Interesting question. No, I guess not. So wait, what was the first thing you mentioned? You said large projects and
you mentioned in individual projects you get a lot more freedom and can say that your work is your own, right?
Yeah.
But in group projects, if you're working in a large project and
actually as part of a large project, you can get large projects can be famous because if you put a lot of people together, you are able to accomplish so much more that a lot of people in the community will then hear about it, right? Because obviously 10 people put together working on a project will manage to accomplish and build something much larger than what 1 or 2 people working on a single project will manage to do, right? So you get that kind of thing. My comment earlier was more about, it's about reflecting on what you want, right? It's just one of those things about large projects, in my experience. Not every single person on a large project goes on to kind of reap the benefits of it. Maybe what it is that large projects often have a lot of labor, Okay? So really what I'm trying to say perhaps is, what is a PhD about, right? Is it, ideally every PhD should be about a lot of interesting intellectual thinking, right? But of course, no PhD can be done without some amount of labor, right? When you're working individually on a project, you're doing both, right? But when you're not, I think the dynamic shifts. If you have 10 students on a project, my guess is, and according to what I've seen during my career, I think there are some people who end up doing more of the labor. There are a few people who end up doing more of the intellectual thinking. That's what I mean, right? So you just get split differently. And you don't want to be the labor is all I'm saying, ideally, you know? So that's the downside. Okay. Understanding your advisor's role. All right. So yes, advisor helps take a starter project. I think the biggest thing to say about this is that it is their responsibility to make sure that at any point in your PhD, they should make sure that whatever you're working on is something that other people care about. After you finish that research or after you produce a paper on it, will people care about it? If they're just making you spin your wheels and work on research that most people will not care about, that's a bad advisor. Okay? It's the advisor's responsibility, because you're a student. You haven't, it's not your responsibility to be selecting problems that people will care about. They are the check on you, right? They should help you develop technical skills, proofs, implementation, empirical work, whatever. There are some advisors who do this. They just kind of say, go read these papers and find a problem. So they don't actually give you a problem to work on. They say, go read this papers in this area and find a problem. Personally, I don't find that effective at all. Like, how is a junior PhD student really supposed to find a problem? I find that like a lot of time gets wasted while you just kind of, look for something. So at least it's not my style. I think it's less effective. This thing, advisors, one of the biggest things that an advisor does is help make you part of the research community. Because what happens is, this person, you don't know the research community yet, right? You're a student. You haven't been to conferences yet, or even if you've been to one or two, maybe you don't really understand, like what are all the people in this area thinking about certain topics related to the one that I'm working on, right? But in those weekly meetings with your advisor, in those conversations about your own research, the advisor is the stand-in literally for the entire community. Good advisors know how to sort of, be in these meetings and to say things that, explain to you, that introduce to you how different people in the community will respond to a certain way of solving a problem or to, pitching it a certain way or a certain motivation. Advisors, this should be happening normally as you talk about like what would other researchers think of the problem that we're working on, sometimes like I have conversations like we're thinking about how to write the intro to something and I'm like, no, that pitch won't work. So-and-so thinks that that's not a good way of approaching it. So what would you say to that? That sort of thing needs to come from your advisor, right? And that's what making you part of the community is about. They know how people out there will respond and they need to tell you by sort of doing this, back and forth. And then a really big thing they do is, they help you over the course of your PhD and by kind of pushing you in a certain direction and helping you develop research taste and high research standards. Research taste is a very fuzzy word, right? It's like, how do you have the taste to work on better, more important, perhaps more impactful problems, right? It's something that slowly comes with time. It's very difficult to really, figure out what it should be. But it's related to, why are we doing this? Why are we working on this problem at all? What are the benefits? What's the message? How will the world be better if we actually solved it? Okay, advisor versus boss. This is something I really think is important. I don't think that it is helpful for you to think of your advisor as a boss because, it's not helpful to think that you're doing all of this for your boss. Okay? A PhD is something you do for yourself. The most important product of a PhD is you. Okay? If you think of it as you're just doing this to please this boss, that's not going to lead anywhere, in my opinion. You're simply not going to want to work as hard. It's just not the right mindset for this kind of work. And in truth, an advisor-student relationship is a very complicated relationship. An advisor is your boss. So if you go on vacation, you better tell them that you're going to go in a month or something, right? Like, don't just disappear. That's not cool. So in that sense, they are kind of your boss, but they're also your mentor, right? They're your collaborator. If you work on every piece of research, every paper together, your reputations start to get tied, right? You benefit from the same things. But they're also your evaluator, right? When you finish, they will write letters for you, and they have to be honest in those letters. They will try to promote you and try, support you and say that you're great, but they also need to be honest, right? They should be a promoter. They should go out there and tell people in the community why you're great, why the way you think is important, or whatever. And they're also a source of support. Like when your paper gets rejected, they sort of contextualize it for you. They tell you why it's okay and we're going to make it better, etc. And so much more. I mean, it's a very, very complicated and frankly a lifelong kind of relationship. Once you graduate a PhD student, it's not that they just kind of disappear. You stay connected. Okay. The other thing that students often don't know how to deal with is busy advisors. And advisors will always be busy. Faculty have a lot of things that they're juggling, right? Teaching, research, etc. Service. So what do you do as a student to get their attention, right? You shouldn't just say, oh, my advisor's busy, so I shouldn't bother them. Those are my students who take that approach. They don't get enough out of me. Honestly, they just don't. In fact, I have a conversation with them and say, you're not getting enough out of me. don't just think that I'm busy and therefore you're going to leave me alone. That's not going to work for you. You need to develop these strategies for engaging them. This engagement is obviously on multiple levels. Actually, let me give you an example of strategies for engaging them. I have a long commute from Boston to Providence. I actually live a whole hour's train ride away. So I had one PhD student who would always, if he had a draft, he would print it out literally and come hand it to me right before my train. It was perfect. He knew me. He knew when I would read it, right? And it was just like, that is knowing your advisor and engaging them, right? And every advisor is a person. They have their lives, their patterns, etc. Understand them, engage them, right? Some advisors, when you send them like a long wall of text with a lot of thoughts in it, they just can't process it. Okay, so you can understand, is your advisor that type? Some people, when they see this long wall of text, it actually gives them time to think through all these maybe subtle things that you pointed out, and now they have time to think through and process it before the meeting that's going to happen in 2 days. So you actually help get them, further along before the next meeting. So the wall of text helps, all right? So you're sharing your thoughts and walking through some technical argument in writing actually helps. Again, you need to figure out which one of these two, works with your advisor and go accordingly. And yeah, what are your needs, right? Like you need them. There's of course all the technical advice that they give you, right? There's technical engagement, but there's all sorts of other things as well that you need from your advisor over that, course of your PhD. You need to talk about research planning and thesis planning, right? There need to be periodic meetings where you talk about these things. They need to provide career advice, and you need to be getting this at the right moments in your career. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to walk through when should you be having certain conversations, years 1 through 5. Planning for job search, learning skills like grant writing, reviewing papers, how to do a research pitch in front of people, right? How to pitch a new idea. Okay, slightly different topic. So I want to talk about pressure to publish because this is something that often students get very, sort of anxious about and wonder about. So there's often this question, do I need to publish N papers during my PhD for whatever N might be, right? You might look around, you might feel like, oh, I need to make sure that I have this many papers by the time I finish or in whichever year. And when do I need to have my first paper, etc. And I think there are many different answers to this question, so let me just kind of give you my ideal and tell you where to worry and where not to. So this is my ideal, and there's lots of variation, and often depends, right? Are you doing more theoretical work? Are you doing more implementation work, etc.? So the timeline will vary. But generally, finish your first paper or your starter project in, let's say, year 2 or so. And what that does is it, gives this experience, you get to experience the full process of, doing research, writing the paper, engaging with the community, getting reviews, thinking about how reviewers respond and how you want to respond to what the reviewer said, right? It's making you kind of part of the community and giving you experience with how we all do this. But I would say that after that, maybe you should take your time, right? Don't be like in a hurry to just, publish papers, bang, 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 right? Often, if you do that, you're just kind of, you're going for low-hanging fruit. I think what's really nice, the precious thing about a PhD is that it gives you time that we profs don't have, because we do too many other things all at once. But during our PhDs, we all have the time to go deeply investigate something new. So maybe after, like your first paper, the starter project where you were learning things, take your time, investigate something deep. Read the literature, internalize it, connect things, right? It might take you a while to sort of, struggle with it and come to any sort of, new, well-formed idea by putting multiple things together. And often, if this goes well, this opens up a new area, right? For dissertations, right? Novel contribution to research. But it's perfect if it opens up a new area. And once you do that, the fruits of that are amazing. Basically, what I've seen is that people who do that, who really struggle with it, there might not be any papers for a little while in the middle of their PhD, but then suddenly there's a burst of like 3/4, okay? Because they took the time, and that time then has payoff. Okay? And of course, in the meantime, you can continue to collaborate with other people in your group, right? So that you're learning about, you don't have to be first author on the other papers. You can be third author, fourth author, help out with some projects, and kind of learn other things as well. This is a way of developing breadth, and that helps. Remember my last line here? I think a few high quality papers are far better than many so-so ones. Okay? And anyone that you talk to out there who is sort of senior enough and has seen hiring and has seen people who graduate, PhDs and we evaluate candidates and so on, will tell you that. Okay, risks. Here's a nice line. It's not research if it can't fail. This is a line from Matthias Blythe, he loves to say this. It's not research if it can't fail. You really have to think about that. You're not doing anything important or research-like if there wasn't that risk. But there are ways of mitigating that risk, and this is where an advisor can really help. The advisor you guys can have a conversation and figure out like what's the backup plan, how far do we go, what is not working out, where are we right now, when is it time to pull the plug? If something has been dragging on for too long and you're just not managing to figure it out, and something like that. The other important thing is, important risk is when you're done, will people care? Big risk, right? Can't fully 100% know, right? But this is again where your advisor can sort of help you assess why do they think people will care, right? But it's important to ask this question as the research project goes on, right? Maybe every 3-4 months or something, you see where you are. What tasks did the work take in the last few months? And so now, given where we are, what are the odds that we will manage to come up with a solution that is practical and convincing, right? That isn't just sort of avoiding some hard problem and solving something minor, right? Are there going to be compelling applications from coming out, of what you do? So just, it's really, really important to reflect on all of that throughout the process. Yeah.
Is failed research still worth publishing, or in other words, is a negative result the same as failed research?
Negative results are actually publishable. Failed research is when you can't even get the negative results. You can't get a positive or a negative result in a sense. Negative results are harder to publish than positive ones, though. Yeah, sometimes you think that you're going to use this approach to solve a certain problem, but let's say you're trying to prove something and it just doesn't work out. You just can't get there. Month after month, you're tweaking things, changing things. Or maybe what happens along the way is you say, oh, okay, we can't do it that way, so maybe we do it this way. But this way is really so much weaker. Like you can just see that if you wrote the motivation for the intro for the paper, yours would probably be like, so you need to think about that, right? And you might start out saying, oh, it's really, really compelling, but then you couldn't solve it a certain way and you took different paths. So now, given where you are now, ask the question, is what we're doing good still or not? Or, did we fail to figure out a really, really good solution and now maybe we should abandon it, right? Because we're really not seeing how to do it well. It's too hard. Okay. Key discussions with advisor. Let's kind of go through some of this quickly, right? Year one, you're talking about your starter project. Why this research? How does it advance the state of the art? Why should people care? These are the kinds of conversations you ought to be having. But you should also be talking about, what are your career goals? Of course, first years don't necessarily 100% know what they want to do afterwards, but you should share what you think or feel right now. You know it will change over the course of your PhD, and your advisor knows that too. But you should always kind of share, where you want to go so that they can help you get there. Year two, you're making progress on whatever the starter project might be, refining the message, writing the paper perhaps. You should think about, you should have conversations about, do you like this particular kind of work, this particular topic, right? It's very important to not just let your advisor assume, oh, you worked on X for this, so you're just going to continue working on X. Maybe you didn't like it, right? So have those conversations. So that you can do a slight, course correction and work on something that you feel better interests you. Because I think everyone does their best research when they are working on things that they care about, when they're interested in those problems. What would you like to work on after the first paper, right? And again, it doesn't have to be more of the same. Year three. So again, I'm describing a 5-6 year timeline, right? Very US kind of model, so compress it if you're in other models. Maybe for European PhDs, this happens, year three is actually year one. So keep that in mind. So you're doing kind of dissertation planning, right? What do you want? What are your career goals? Do you want to go into academia afterwards? Do you want to go into industry? Do you want research labs, right? You should be having conversations about all of these things. And I've sort of lumped all of these things together, right? Like planning the dissertation and connecting it to what your career goals are, because in my mind, they really are very much connected, right? If you are someone who wants to be an academic, you want to apply for faculty positions after you finish, I, as an advisor, have to make sure that the thing that is going to be your dissertation is something that is big enough and impressive enough for you to be a faculty candidate. And if I'm not helping you do that, then I'm not serving your interests. Okay, so this is a conversation to be had. And students can't tell whether this is too big or too small. It's the advisor's job, so we need to have that conversation. And it's connected to what you want after, right? You will refine your plans about what the research is, over time. But you're kind of working backward, right? I want to get there, so what do I do before that? When you finish, let's say if you're applying for faculty positions, there's a question of what will be the story of your research when you go out there and interview, right? In my mind, that's connected to what is in your dissertation. Therefore, what will be the story about your research that I will tell in my reference laboratory? So all of this is connected, and it's happening, 3 years or so before you finish. If you're not talking about these things and what your goals are, then you and your advisor together can't properly craft, or at least kind of push in the right directions to get you where you want to go. Is the story research compelling enough for academic positions? That's something you should assess. Year four, refining thesis, paper plans, what are you going to do along the way? What are the milestones? When do you want to graduate? What intermediate deadlines does that imply? If you have personal things going on that mean you want to graduate earlier or later, that's something your advisor needs to know along the way. I'm just saying communicate, right? Communicate whatever your goals and needs are. Conversations about choosing committee members. Committee members can be really important, especially again if you're applying for academic positions, because the people on your dissertation committee are people that you can go to write reference letters for you, right? Choosing the right people is something your advisor can help you do. So it's not just, you don't just pick committee members based on their technical expertise. You might want to pick them based on some slight other factors as well, Are they nice people? Do they write good letters? Do they always give everyone a really bad letter? Hey, if I have someone like that, maybe I would ask my students to not put them on their committee. Right? To have that conversation. Advisors know a lot about other people out there. Okay, year 5, generally you're finishing up job applications where you apply. Here too, an advisor is so important, and conversations with your advisor are so incredibly important, right? You need to talk about your goals, like ambitions, what kind of jobs do you want? Not just academia versus research labs or something, but how competitive a place do you want to be at, or something like that, right? What are your ambitions? You have geographical constraints. If you do, then your advisor can help you sort of, think in certain ways to address that. Yeah, so if you're applying for academic positions, these are things, conversations you then ought to be having with your advisor, right? I like having this conversation with my 5th-year students before they apply for positions, like, so what are your research plans for the next 5 to 10 years? If I don't ask them, they're going to go on the job market, and someone else is going to ask them. So they better have me ask them first, right? So they can think about it and come up with an answer. If their answer is too small, I need to tell them. You know what I mean by small, right? Not ambitious enough. It's not going to sound good or ambitious to the people who are interviewing you. Stop that. Think a little more. You can do better, right? Again, this is the safe space thing, right? Like, you want to hear this from your advisor, your group. You don't want to hear this out there in the job market. Talking about how to tell a compelling research story in a job talk, right? Sometimes your dissertation is just X, Y, Z, but how you tell the story of that dissertation is the important part, right? It's not just a story about your dissertation, it's a story about maybe this other paper that you wrote on the side that isn't even in the dissertation, plus the main techniques developed in your dissertation, plus all that cool stuff that you're going to do for the 5 to 10 years that follow. That's the story, right? How do you connect all of those pieces together? And these are things that you talk through with your advisor. You sketch them out. You kind of, it's like kind of blue sky thinking a little bit, like you're putting it all together and seeing what works. There are other things, applying for academic positions. You should talk about teaching plans, grant writing, funding. How do funding agencies work? What does a grant proposal even look like? Etc. Actually, one of the things that I do for any students who are interested in academic positions, I make sure that somewhere along the line I have written a grant proposal. I mean, of course, the professor is always the lead, the PI, the program, the principal investigator on any grant. But having them see what a grant proposal looks like, write a middle section, perhaps a technical section of it, perhaps a related work section, it really, really helps. One thing that I've noticed PhD students really struggle with when going from writing research papers to writing grant proposals. I had a student, Max, who was really kind of, when we were writing a grant proposal, he was like, this is so ridiculous. In a research paper, you have to be so precise about what you did. And here we're like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yes, but that's what a grant proposal is. It's a different mindset, right? You're proposing. You have to think big and not worry too much about I haven't figured it all out yet. It's a proposal. You're not supposed to have figured it out yet. Right? But it is a very different kind of document you're writing compared to our papers. Collaboration plans, who do you collaborate with and things like that. This can all kind of come together to form a story of who you are and who you want to be. Running out of time. Okay. I just want to say a little bit about developing your network. This is sort of standard stuff, talk to people here, get to know people, get to know your peer group. Some of these people are exactly the people who are going to be your future collaborators, like even if you're a first year and so on. Other things you should be doing in years 1 and 2 is, give posters at these student research competitions. That's a really good way to sort of get out there and talk about work in progress. Giving workshop talks. Basically, practice explaining your work to others. It's really, really useful. You have to go through this over and over and over again, and that's how you improve. I'm going to talk about this. What happens when you, explain your work to others? People might criticize, they might object, they might say, what about this or that, right? How do you then process other people's objections and praise? That's a very important thing to kind of think through and figure out how to do. Talk to your advisor about it. Basically, every person who listens to you give a talk or present a poster has a different background. Some of them might seem overly critical of something you're doing, but you have to know who this is who's speaking at this moment and what their particular background is, right? Not every piece of feedback from every single person should be put on the same footing. right? Because people have different backgrounds and different prejudices or things that they like. And you have to take that into account as you figure out how much importance to give that, right? As you move forward with that work. Figure out which feedback to ignore and how to address the rest. There's definitely some feedback that we want to ignore. Okay? And again, these are things to talk to your advisor about. They can help you kind of figure it out. Later, I often recommend, give talks at other departments. We used to say if you're in the area, go do it, but now everything is, people are giving Zoom talks online, so it's much easier, and you should take advantage of that. I want to show this slide. Just about developing your network. Everyone tells us go network, go meet people, etc. But I want you to reflect on how we develop a network. We all have collaborators or people in our lab, our advisor, fellow students, etc. Right? Or people maybe at other departments, but who are our collaborators and co-authors in our papers. That's our inner circle, people we work with. But this circle is really, really important, right? Finding like-minded colleagues who care about similar techniques or problems to what you work on, who understand your work and will read your work, right? And then they can go out there and be your champions. They won't be your collaborators, but they'll be some of the most fun people for you to talk to, And this is, you'll start to realize this as you become a third, fourth, fifth year, that this network even exists, because in the beginning it doesn't for us. But that's something really that you ought to cultivate. It makes it fun to be an academic, and go to conferences and talk to people. And then the outer circle here, these are the people who are never going to read your papers. They'll maybe listen to your talk for 5 minutes and be like, oh yeah, something like that happened. But they cannot be the people who go out there and champion you, because they don't really know what you're doing. So it's these people who know what you're doing, cultivate them, right? Okay, so just last slide, takeaways, some last final words of wisdom. Find the right advisor. What you want is a research fit and a personality fit. That really is the most important thing. Use your PhD years to think big, ask those deep questions, and read a lot. You don't have that kind of time. That's really precious time during your PhD. You don't have it so much later. And it basically forms the foundation for the rest of your career, in my opinion. It's important to remember that despite everything I've said, no advisor will be perfect at everything. We're all different human beings. Some of us, have certain strengths and certain, and other people have others. So if you, find strategies to engage your advisor, but also find other mentors for things that your advisor is not good at. That's really important, right? Because then you can really get good advice on a lot of different fronts. You need to balance. You need to spend time on your own research, but you also need to spend time, attending talks and being a good lab citizen and talking to people and so on. And then, it's important to every step along the way, every 6 months, year, semester, to sort of reflect on your progress, review your goals. Where am I? Do I like the stuff I'm doing? What do I want to be doing after? For me, around year 3 or so, I remember there was this moment of reflection where I was like, do I like this stuff? And I kind of decided I did. You might decide you don't, right? But it's important to kind of think about that. And to really think about, do people care about this research, right? And figure out how to better explain why it matters. And I want to say just one thing about why it matters. I do very theoretical work, and I think when I finished, I realized that for people who do more theoretical work, there's a higher burden on you to explain to people why it matters. Okay? That's okay. Don't shy away from it. It is a burden. Go off and do it. Believe that you can do it and you can explain it. Don't just say that, oh, they don't understand, it's their fault. No, the world doesn't work that way. All right? So learn to explain why it matters. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So we've got a lot of good advice. So let's take questions. We're going to start from the room. So do you have any questions from the room?
Questions, thoughts?
Yes.
First off, thank you for the great presentation. I'm Arnie Medavi from the University of Washington. Excuse me. One of the things that's kind of organically emerging, at least in our department, is the second kind of faculty person who is by your visualization falls under like-minded colleagues.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily your advisor, could be close to your advisor or not. They are not also your co-advisor.
Yes.
Like you would like form a partnership with them where they become your mentor. I noticed that you did not like necessarily include that in your presentation. If I wanted to tell you all the good things that can happen from this, you would probably turn around and tell me that this is a good idea.
It's a great idea. Yeah.
But would there be pitfalls in having somebody else who's an outsider who could potentially give you feedback that would be contradicting to the direction of your professor? Or I guess, do you have any suggestions to create a framework like that if your institution can support it? If that makes sense.
Yes, so the question is that there might be other faculty in your department, let's say, and I would say that they can be outside your department too, but they might be collaborators of your advisor, right? They could be the ones who fall into this like-minded circle that I was pointing at. The concern is that, okay, let's say you start to get advice from people like that, then could there be pitfalls to that, right? Especially if they're giving you some sort of advice or feedback that contradicts what your advisor thinks. Talking to people who offer advice that contradicts what your advisor says is always very tricky. Partly because it's hard for PhD students to really figure out, right? Like, does this person have a point? Should I be trusting my advisor more? I don't exactly know how to answer that one. Maybe I'll step back a little bit and say that when I was thinking of like-minded advisor, I had it on this growing your network kind of slide. And I was thinking about, I'll just share a particular experience that I had. When I was a postdoc with Greg Marset, he said, you and so-and-so, Nick Benton at MSR Cambridge, you should talk. Because he knew that, the way I thought and the way Nick Benton thought was very similar, right? And getting to know Nick Benton, visiting MSR, I got to know a lot of other people, right? That to me was like this growing your network with like-minded researchers, right? And Pitts was there and so on, like a whole crowd of people who understood the kind of work I worked on. So that's what I was thinking of. Your question is tricky, and I don't entirely know how to answer it. I think that it is good to seek out people like that, but I don't have a clear, simple answer to, if you get advice that's contradictory, who should you be listening to? I think it depends on the particular situation. Perhaps the best thing to do is to get, if you get some sort of advice that's different from what your advisor is telling you, give that to your advisor. That's the best thing to do, right? And say, all right, so-and-so thinks that if we do this, this won't really work out, or it won't, sell so well, or the motivation is weak, or something like that. What do we do about this? And, you have a conversation about it. Either your advisor says, yeah, I'm not really so concerned because this person, is more from this community and therefore thinks that this should be a worry, but I don't think it should be, right? You need to understand why your advisor might not be worried about it. Or you have just brought some information to your advisor and the two of you together will address it, and that will make your work stronger.
For the record, I've seen it happen with other students. I have not, even though I have a mentor figure like that, I have not had this contradictory situation. Right. So I just thought that.
Yeah, and it's very nice to have people like that.
My question is, what happens if your PhD runs longer than it's supposed to? Mm-hmm. Wherever you go, does that affect hiring later on? Because hiring might look at how long it took you and say, oh, this person is really slow or something like that?
Actually, no.
No?
Okay, so I'm going to talk from a U.S. perspective because that's what I know. Okay. I remember several years ago when I was a very junior faculty member, I was on the hiring committee for the first time or something. I started realizing that people who were the hottest candidates on the market that year had actually taken longer to finish. Nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. Because at the end, what people are looking at when you are applying for faculty positions is what is your record. Okay, sometimes there might be a slight conversation about, yeah, but, when you compare this candidate to this candidate, this one, it took this many years and did produce this much. But that's really about the seniority and time of each candidate, but it does never hurt you, in my opinion. So don't worry about that. The only time, if you're taking too long to finish your PhD, there is such a thing as perhaps too long. If you're taking way too long, your department will probably start to get upset and be like, get out, we can't fund you anymore, right? But that's
No, it's not at that stage.
yes,
Just maybe one
not
year longer.
absolutely not. In fact, I advise my PhD students, especially if they want to be academics afterwards, my advice to them is take another year. It's fine. Because there's so much exponential growth that happens in that last extra year. So instead of 5, definitely do not finish in less than 6 if you want to be an academic. That's my standard advice, like US standards. I don't think that anyone who's looking for academic job positions should finish in less than 6 in the US, because at least in PL, I think you just haven't had enough time to produce that. And the candidate that I was mentioning had actually taken 7.5 and was, got an excellent position. Nobody cares.
Just one more comment.
Yeah.
You seem to worry about the comparison between the US system and the European.
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't know what I'm talking about.
From my experience, the 2 first years in the US correspond to a master's.
A master's, yes,
That's-
exactly.
From your presentation and everything, that's what I
Okay.
get.
So we have one question from virtual side. So Molly, maybe
Sure,
you-
I can read it out. So the question is, like, grant funding is really important, to power research. And so the question was, at the initial starter project to post initial starter project stage, like, how much flexibility does the student have if they're still under kind of that grant funding umbrella?
Does the person asking the question, can they tell us which country system they're in?
I think it's just a general purpose question. So, but you can answer however best fits you.
Yeah, so I think in my mind this is connected, it may be connected to certain constraints in different systems, so countries might matter, but I think that this mostly depends on the advisor's style. Okay, so some advisors might say, oh, I have grant funding for this, and so I need you to work on this throughout, right? But there are some advisors, and I tend to do this, you're on a starter project that's being funded by one of my grants, but if you decide at the end of that you actually would rather be working on something slightly different, I will work with you and we'll write a new grant proposal for precisely that research. That's, I think, the best way to do it, right? If you end up wanting to work on something slightly different, you can write a grant proposal to fund essentially that thing. And if you're onto a good idea, then getting that grant proposal funded is such a big, cool thing. It gives you confidence that other people believe in what you're doing too. So I hope that helps. And again, it depends on the advisor. Some advisors might be like, no, I can't write another grant proposal. I'm not going to do this, right? But others will help you get the work that you want to do funded.
This question is particularly regarding the US system because that's what you have the most information on. So assume you are able to defend your thesis, but you have papers that you want to still push out.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better to get the PhD if you can secure a postdoc at the same institution,
Mm-hmm.
or prolong the PhD and finish the papers? That doesn't make sense.
I think they're sort of equivalent. There's only one major difference. You get paid a lot more as a postdoc. So if your advisor has funding to pay you a lot more as a postdoc, then sure. But postdocs do cost a lot more. Double.
So
So it's good for you, but is there enough funding?
okay, so if there's money, if my advisor has money, do a postdoc. Get a PhD.
Well, okay, so let me say one other thing. Doing a postdoc at the same institution where you're getting your PhD is generally not the best thing. If you're going to do a postdoc, go find someone who works on something slightly different so that you can learn a new set of skills, right? So finish your PhD, perhaps you still have a few papers to push out, maybe you can push them out as, right as you're starting your postdoc or something. But generally, if you're looking, if you want to spend the time doing a postdoc, find someone who can teach you a skill that you haven't already learned. There?
Yeah, I'll just chime in on this point. So 2 things. One, in Europe, it depends on where, but in some places in Europe, you can PhD is time limited.
Yeah.
And then
you have to
staying around for a postdoc is not necessarily I would say it's not that. It depends if you're continuing work that was your PhD work,
Yeah.
with the same collaborators, et cetera, it may make sense to pick them. But the other thing is, if you have the option of picking a longer PhD, one benefit can be getting that sort of clearer shape for the whole thesis, right? It might help you have a more coherent thesis than you would otherwise. That may or may not matter. I mean, in terms of actually your jobs and stuff, it probably doesn't matter. It might matter. Yeah, I mean, it can be nice to have a nice coherent thesis that you want people to point. If you want to point people to that.
Right. Yeah. Well, the question does assume that like the other work is not part of your thesis, because if it was part of your thesis, you could have finished it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's a question of where you define the thesis. Like a thesis could be big or small.
Yeah.
That's true.
You would have to
I
make
think
sure.
you just have to discuss this one.
Yeah.
That's true.
But the point about in Europe, etc., PhDs being time limited, that's a very, that's not so much the case in the US. There's more flexibility.
No, not that one.
What?
I have another question.
Yeah.
I think you didn't touch on internships in the presentation.
Right.
Okay, so
And should you do them?
yeah, should you? How important it is?
I think it's a great idea, especially if you want to, you want a position at research labs, or you want to see what that life is like. It's very important to do, more than one, maybe two internships. If they're a great opportunity, like let's say you're in a small department and you don't have a lot of, different kinds of maybe PL faculty to learn from. That's another scenario in which, you go to a research lab, you learn different skills, you publish a paper on a slightly different topic. It's just that if you should try and make sure that the internships that you do are not just programming, right? They're not just developer stuff. They actually are research internships that will hopefully, you can't always know, but hopefully they will lead to a publication. Those are, and that's absolutely very, very worthwhile. It also gives you another letter writer or set of letter writers, right? So it's a very good thing. And these days they pay more than a PhD stipend, so you also make more money. Something to keep in mind.
Any other questions? I have one question.
Yeah.
So how can we develop consistent work habits?
Oh my God, that's a hard one.
Watch a YouTube video about how to.
Watch a YouTube video on how to develop consistent art. It's going to be different for every single person, given everyone's personality, and there's so much advice out there on how to do it. I can say what motivates me. I'm not there are some people who are very, very thorough and organized and whatever. I'm not one of those people, but I find that I do have consistent work habits when I'm interested in a problem. It's a very fuzzy answer. It's very personal to me. But there's a lot of advice out there that I think can help with that.
Makes sense.
Sorry, sort of a non-answer. Yeah.
You had to talk a little bit more about what faculties are looking for when you're employing new faculty members. Like, so what sort of things should we try to develop in these?
So when they're hiring new faculty? Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we really don't know as PhD students. So when we're on hiring committees and when we are listening to faculty candidates give their job talk, in a sense, what we're looking for research vision. We're looking for someone who already seems to have some of the maturity of being a colleague, right? And so let me just sort of elaborate on those two. Research vision means that you're talking, there's cool work that you've done, there are publications that justify, those are your credentials, that's what you've done. But I wouldn't hire you just for that, right? I want to see that what you're talking about for the next 5 to 10 years is something that if you manage to do it, a lot of people would care. And I'm looking to see that given what you have done, you actually seem to be the person who should be doing that, right? You have the skills. It's not just that you're saying, oh, I did A, but now I'd like to solve Z, right? They're totally disconnected. That doesn't work either, right? That's part of what I was saying about research story, right? So given the work that you've done, given the stuff that's going into your dissertation, it's very important to think about, all right, so now how do I use this and say, what do I want to work on? That's an important problem that people care about, that will make the world better, that will be funded, all of those things. Maybe funding is another thing. And the thing I said about being a colleague, what does that mean? It can encompass so much. Do you talk in a way that sounds like you know at least a little bit about how grant writing and funding might work, even if you haven't done it yet, right? Have you thought, have you reflected on what it might take to teach a course? And again, teaching is something that, you know, most of us are very flexible with. I learned as a first-year faculty member when I was teaching a very large class that my senior colleagues did not expect any of us, you know, first-year faculty to be great the first time. The expectation is that they expect you to improve over time. If you're not improving, then you're not a good teacher, right? But none of us are good the first time. That's also something to keep in mind because it takes a lot of the pressure off of us. Otherwise, we end up being like, I can't teach it, all these other people can. But they've been doing it for 10 years or 20 years, right? That's different. So they're expecting you to get better. Yeah, stuff like that. It's a presence. It's a kind of, you know, saying, these are the things I want to do, and they matter. And having some breadth, right? Because the colleagues that we hire, oh, here's another thing. If we hire you, everyone gets super excited about hiring people that they could actually see themselves having conversations with or perhaps collaborating with. So knowing how to talk to people who aren't necessarily completely in your area is a very important skill, right? It says that you're a well-rounded researcher with some amount of breadth and you're the type of person who is interested in other people's research problems and are interested in connecting, you know, slightly different areas or something. All of these are very, very important.
Great. Any more questions from the room? Do you have virtual questions, Molly?
I think most of the virtual questions got answered. It was generally about Europe versus US, but I think Derek spoke to it.
Okay. Then let's thank Amal again. All right. So we've